Hi, Mrs. Smith. Nice to see you again. I brought the materials I told you about. I printed out some materials about diabetes and type 2 diabetes and how to manage it. But like you'd asked me before, I just wanted to go through what type 2 diabetes is and how sugar will affect you and how you can kind of manage that. So in general, diabetes, the main issue is for you is that your body is not taking sugar into the cells, sugar that's in the blood from, things that you've eaten and things like that. It's going into the cells much slower than normal in a normal body without diabetes, right? So if you had type 1 diabetes, it pretty much wouldn't be taking in sugar at all, which is quite a big problem. But you have type 2 diabetes, so it does still take in sugar, just not as fast as normal and sometimes not as much as normal. So the problem is that leaves a lot of sugar in the blood going around and around all day, and that can damage cells long term, which is something we really want to avoid. And so for people with type 2 diabetes, it's recommended that overall we don't eat foods with a lot of sugar. We kind of keep it to a certain amount, but also we try not to eat too much sugar at one time. We try to kind of keep it balanced throughout the day so that your body has time to take it into the cells. Instead of having a ton for breakfast or something, it would just take so long and it's circulating. So we kind of split it up into what's called carb choices. So, do you know what carbohydrates are? Okay, you kind of explained that you do. Carbohydrates are foods that at the base level are made up of sugars, right? So that of course includes things like table sugar, but that's also things like grains, things that have grains in them like bread and like a tortilla, and cereals, foods that are made with grains and that have a lot of fruit sugar, things like that. Those things break down at their most basic level into sugars, right? And so those will just go around and around, and long term that can create issues, like it can damage the tissues and it can damage the nerves, or the tissues can start to die, which is a really big problem. People can lose fingers and toes because of it, because sugar is going through these tiny capillaries all day so much that it can damage things. It can damage eyes. It can just have a lot of long-term problems. So we just want to, obviously we want to still keep carbs in your diet. We want to keep fruit in your diet. We want to make sure we have a healthy, well-rounded diet. But we want to make sure that we're not overloading our body with sugar at one time so that we can keep it normal. Does that make sense? We can keep the level kind of steady. So there's lots of ways that we can manage that, which is great news. I printed out, like I said, quite a few things. This is talking about how we can count our carbs. For you, the recommended diet is 3 to 4 carb choices per meal. So if we were only talking a piece of bread, that would be 3 to 4 pieces of bread per meal. But obviously we don't want that much bread all day. So it would be an orange and a piece of toast for breakfast. That would be, if it's a small to medium sized orange, that'd be 2 carb choices. And if you had half a banana with that, that'd be 3 carb choices per meal. So we're getting some things that have carbs, but not lots and lots of carbs. And so we spread that out, throughout the day. I printed out a couple of things and we can go through them. I'll hand these to you. You can kind of tell me what you'd like me to go through. Here's an example menu of a day that has carb choices split out throughout the day. And then I have a list of things that break down what is a carb choice, what kind of does that look like. There's also something called the plate method, where if you don't want to count carbs, if you don't want to because there's some math involved in it that I can show you later. But in the plate method, you basically just keep half of your plate as vegetables, non-starchy vegetables. So a potato, things like that would be considered a carb, right? They have a lot of carbs in it. But things like broccoli or spinach or things like that have very little carbs. It might have a teeny tiny amount, but very little. So half your plate is vegetables, a fourth of your plate is proteins, and a fourth of your plate will be those carbs. So things that are fruits that have a lot of plant sugars, and bread and potatoes, things like that, rice. A fourth of your plate. So that kind of overall helps us stay balanced. Is there any questions that you have? Is there anything else you'd like me to go over from this packet? Hello, Mrs. Smith. Hope you're having a good day. It's good to see you again. Okay, I brought the materials I told you about chronic kidney disease. I printed some off for you, and we can go through them a little bit today. But I just wanted to talk to you about the overview, because you told me you just recently got diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and you were telling me something that it was stage 4, right? Is that what they told you? Okay. So stage 4, it looks like you're not in total like renal dysfunction. That's like stage 5. Typically is how they classify them. And so your kidneys are working a little, but the point is that they're not working as well as they should be. And so the thing that the kidneys do is they filter our blood, right? And they filter a lot of things out of our blood, and then usually we'll be able to pee out whatever we, have too much of or our body doesn't want in our blood anymore. And so the issue when they're not working is that things start to accumulate in our blood. So of course that means we're not peeing out as much water as we normally would be. So water can start to accumulate. But then some minerals, especially salt, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are kind of some of the big ones that we want to focus on with kidney disease. Now I know you're not to the point where you're going to be on dialysis, but these are still things that we want to think about a little bit, because your labs did come back and they were fairly high. Like we had talked about that before a little bit. So essentially we just want to keep foods, we want to keep a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables in our diet, and processed foods that have deli meats or packaged things. A lot of times they'll be really high in salt, they'll be really high in phosphorus, and they can be high in potassium as well. And so we want to just make sure that we're not eating a ton of those foods, because salt is going to pull a lot of water into our it makes us retain more water. It can contribute to hypertension. But also our kidney's going to have to filter that out as well, right? And then the phosphorus and potassium, we're just going to have really high levels. And so if you were at complete kidney failure and you were doing something like dialysis, they would be working to filter things out of your blood for your kidneys, and they would have you take something that's called binders a lot of the time, which can kind of bind that phosphorus down. It makes it so you don't absorb as much of it. But you're not on binders at this point, and your kidneys are still working a little. So we just kind of want to make sure that these levels are in normal range. They're in a decent range. So I brought some printouts, like I said. We want to try, the best way to do it is, like I said, to avoid processed foods. We want to try and keep that salt low, or just under 2,300 milligrams per day, which seems like a lot, but actually some foods have a lot of salt in them. So it's better to cook things from fresh, or just cook the chicken breast yourself and then use spices that don't have salt in it. Like if you've heard of Mrs. Dash, things like that. There's lots of spices and things that you can use that will give it flavor but won't give it salt. Yeah, and that will help you avoid a lot of the phosphorus as well that just comes in a lot of those really processed foods and things like deli meats, things like that. And again, you still can handle a little bit, you can still, your body can still filter some of it, but we just don't want to go overboard. I printed out a sample menu for you. This is for someone who's not on dialysis, and it just has foods, and it specifies amounts that you can eat, and that would keep you in good levels. Not that you have to follow that every day, but that's just sort of a good example. Let's see. I'm trying to go through these papers so you don't get lost in the sauce. But this one is talking about the phosphorus content in foods. So this is just foods that have phosphorus. And so as we can see here, foods that have low phosphorus is all natural chicken, turkey, the things that we were talking about, plain cereals like oatmeal or corn flakes, and things that have high phosphorus are things like processed meats, like those deli meats, and then processed breads and cereals like brownies, cakes, muffins, those sort of things. They just usually have high levels. Sometimes it's in preservatives, things like that. So that'll go through the list. It's hard to remember all the foods, and you don't feel like you have to remember it all the time. It's just we want to keep these, we want to manage this so we're not putting any more stress on those kidneys so that they can stay healthy. I have a list for potassium as well, and we can go through that, and you can ask me any questions. But are there any questions you have with these things? I have the papers for you, but are there any questions you have about managing these things or about kidney disease in general? Hi, Mrs. Smith. It's so good to see you. I brought the materials we talked about when I came around the first time. You told me you had just gotten diagnosed with hypertension and you were asking me about it. So I printed out some stuff for you and that we can go over. But first I wanted to talk about, you'd asked me like what hypertension was, so I wanted to definitely touch on that and just explain it in general. Hypertension is essentially, we're kind of talking about like blood pressure. It's when we have our veins and our arteries have a lot of pressure in them to the point that they're like tight. And blood pressure can go up and down throughout the day, but there's a lot of things food-wise, and then there's things like medication-wise that we can do to help it not be so tight, if you will, because when we have higher blood pressure, we're more likely to get blockages, which can cause things like stroke or heart attack or a lot of damage. There's a lot of problems that can come with having hypertension. So we just want to make sure that our veins aren't so tight and aren't so stressed out, and so that we're not getting those blockages in the same way, so we can avoid it to the best of our ability. So the main thing that we talk about with hypertension is cutting salt. Salt pulls a lot of fluid into our blood. The more salt you have, it has to remain, so your blood has to be at like a certain level, like it has to, like if it's really, really salty, it'll pull more water into the veins so that it's balanced. It maintains a certain balance is what I'm trying to say. And so if we have a lot of salt, it's going to pull in a lot of water to keep that like correct balance, which is going to cause a lot of pressure on the veins. And that's not what we want when we're trying to avoid things like heart attack and stroke. So good idea is to cut sodium. In general, we try to keep our sodium below 2,300 milligrams per day, which it sounds like a lot, but milligrams are really small, and that's actually not a lot. Like sometimes, depending on the brand, you can reach that much in like a pack of ramen kind of thing. Like it's not that much salt. So we want to just make sure we're using other spices and other things that just aren't salt, or things that have less salt, right? So there's something called Mrs. Dash. It's a seasoning that you can season foods with. It can add a lot of flavor and not add a lot of salt. There's lots of great seasonings. Some do have salt, but just less, and then some have none at all. So you can look through like the different kinds that you have, but we want to still have lots of flavor. We want to have lots of good foods, but yeah, limiting that sodium will really help keep that pressure down. Another thing is fats. There can be a lot of fat buildup on the cells. There can get like plaque, which can build up and can cause those blockages as well, which is something we want to avoid. So we want to be eating the right types of fats and make sure that it's like healthy fats. Here, I'll hand this to you. So the best kind of fats to be eating is called unsaturated fats, which are usually like liquids, so like olive oil, or I'm trying to think of another oil, things like coconut oil, how it's a solid at room temperature. That one's a little bit more, that's not as good. It's not terrible. You can still have some coconut oil, but olive oil or avocado oil, that's another one. Those ones are liquid at room temperature, and they are just less likely to like solidify, if that makes sense. We want unsaturated fats in a normal healthy amount, like sunflower oil, things like that. And then we want to have what's called omega-3 fatty acids, which is a huge name, but it's just sort of things like fish oils. So fish is really great, and you can be getting really healthy fats from that. The fats we want to avoid are called saturated fats, and it's things like butter, and things like just typically fats that are solid at room temperature. Basically, they can just clog our arteries. That's the gist of it, is once they circulate in the blood, right, and can get absorbed, but if they don't get absorbed, sometimes they can get kind of pressed along the side of our veins, and they create plaque, which can create blockages, is kind of the idea. So we want to make sure that we have the right kinds of fats, and we want to keep our cholesterol low, so that which those healthy fats will help with, so we can keep our veins healthy and happy. So foods that are recommended is just a general healthy diet typically, which we want like whole grains, we want things like vegetables. I'll hand you all these after, I promise. And then we want like not super processed foods, like fast foods and boxed foods tend to have a lot of salt and a lot of those unhealthy fats because they're shelf stable, right? They can last a really long time, but we don't want them lasting a really long time in our bodies. We're trying to stay healthy. So foods not recommended, just like really heavy creams and like a lot of canned foods that have a lot of salt. You can get a lot of things that say salt free. There's lots of foods like that. Just like things like soy sauce, things that are kind of sneaky can have a lot of salt in them. So we just need to watch out and make sure that we're being really mindful of our salt intake and just eating a really healthy diet with things like fiber, because fiber, if you eat fiber with your food, so it can trap some of the cholesterol and things like that. That's the unhealthy fats, so that you won't absorb as much of it. So we want to just make sure we're eating lots of plant foods, lots of whole grains, so that it keeps our body healthy. This is an example menu that you can look through, but let me know if you have any more questions. Is there anything else I can do for you?